I don't think guilt is rational. That's the truth. I don't think it's a rational feeling. I think that guilt, similar like Sarah, you said, it's a feeling of there's something happening that I feel bad about. There's something happening that I wish wasn't happening, that, I feel bad that there's somebody else suffering. I feel bad that there's somebody else who's not doing well. I was chosen to do well by, again, this feeling of like, it's out of my control. I really didn't do anything to make this happen more for me than somebody else. We both underwent treatment. We're both doing what we're supposed to be doing. I survived. She didn't. Why?
Welcome to On Air with Chai, a podcast that inspires, brings hope, shows resilience and strength. From being diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease at the age of 22 to going to Camp Simcha and becoming the Director of Family Services in the Chai Lifeline head office in New York, Dr. Cheryl Book talks about her journey and what led her down the path of giving back and helping others in a similar situation. Don't forget to share with your friends, subscribe, and leave us that 5-star review. Enjoy.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of On Air with Chai. Today I am joined obviously by my trusty co-host, Rothman.
Hello everybody.
We have a very special guest co-host today, Sarah Bloom, who is one of our directors of Family Services.
Hi everybody.
And today we have another very special guest, all the way from New York, who is, I guess, Sarah's counterpart, we'd say, Director of Family Services of Chai Lifeline in New York. Cheryl.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Hi.
So,
Hi.
Looking forward.
So can we call you, what do we call you? Do we call you Doc? Do we call you Cheryl? What can we call you?
We have Dr. Cheryl. We have Dr. Book. That's for my parents. But the rest of us are really Dr. Cheryl works. Cheryl works.
Okay, we'll go with Dr. Cheryl. That's perfect. Okay, so Dr. Cheryl, could you tell us, I guess in your own words, just there's so much talent and there's so many interesting stories at Chai Lifeline. Could you share yours? How did you get to Chai Lifeline? How are you in the position that you're in currently? And start as early as you want.
Sure. Okay, so I think I actually have a unique story to the staff of Chai Lifeline. I don't think there are too many people on staff that have a similar story. When I was 22, I was actually diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. I had undergone treatment and actually was introduced to Chai Lifeline in the hospital and was offered to go to Camp Simcha, which at first I was completely against. I was like, I'm 22 years old. I don't need to be in camp. I don't need to be going as a camper. That's just crazy. I've been a division head in other camps. Like, this is just, no, I really don't need this. With the convincing of several volunteers, several doctors, I did end up going to camp. And it was literally life-changing for me. Camp Simcha was, as my parents said, the first camp they didn't pay for, but the camp that I loved the most out of all camps that I've ever been to as a kid. It really.
So, and how old were you when you went
22.
to camp? You were older already. But it's an interesting point that you made, which was, it took a lot of people to get you there, right? It took your doctors, took your volunteers, took I'm sure a lot of convincing to take a 22-year-old woman and get her to go to camp for a couple of weeks. And I think that speaks a lot to Chai Lifeline, that some people don't even realize some of the underpinnings of how much it takes to actually convince someone to go to camp. You think, oh, everybody wants to go to Camp Simcha. Like, it's amazing. And really it takes a community of people often to push somebody to go. Anyway, I digress. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yep. I think the truth is I didn't really realize what I was missing. I thought I was doing fine. I was doing great. I had the support of friends, I had the support of my family. And I didn't realize I was missing that support of other people who got it. And when I got to camp, it was the first time I really was talking to other girls who were around my age, and who had been in similar situations. I'll give you just one example of that. Like, I was near the end of my treatment by the time I went to camp. I think that year was in probably August time, and I was finishing treatment by September. And it sounds crazy, but I was like nervous to end treatment, because I kind of knew, as a patient, I knew my job. I knew what I was supposed to do. I knew that we were taking care of this. I knew we were fighting this, and I was getting rid of the cancer. And as we approached the end, I kind of got nervous that like, okay, now what? What do I do now? And I thought this was like a crazy thought until I realized that I met other girls who were feeling the exact same way. I had one girl in my bunk who said to me, it was the first time I went to therapy, was at the end of therapy, at the end of treatment. And it's something that now in my job, which I guess I use a lot with parents. The idea that after that, treatment's over is actually emotionally sometimes even more difficult than the during, and it's an idea that you don't necessarily think. You think it's kind of counterintuitive. Your thought would be treatment's over, you're back to normal.
It takes over your life
so
in that manner, right? So you're in the hospital, you're doing your treatments, your schedules, your life is revolved around those treatments. So yeah, I mean, you kind of get set in your routine and your other life gets put in the back burner and you got to kind of fit it back into your normal again.
Right.
So you go to camp and it was an amazing experience.
Amazing experience. After camp was over, I actually started graduate school that year. So really a weird juxtaposition of being a camper to starting graduate school.
And graduate school in which studies?
In psychology. And when I finished graduate school, the first thought I thought was, I want to work for Chai Lifeline in some capacity. I want to be a part of this. I want to do something for children who have been sick, children who've gone through treatment. And I ended up applying as an intern, actually, for the Chai Lifeline crisis team. And I started interning for, I think, about a year and a half or so. And then...
and while you were in school, were you volunteering at all, or you had no involvement?
I was volunteering. I had a little sister. I was a big sister to a girl, actually, from Camp Simcha Special. And so I was definitely doing that. I had gone back to camp as a counselor. I then went back to camp as a division head. And I really kind of went up the ranks in camp and really got to experience all the different facets of camp.
Are we allowed to ask what year this was?
The year I went to camp I went to camp as a counselor about 2000. I was diagnosed in 2001. A counselor, I believe, 2004, 2005. Started interning for Chai Lifeline, I think 2009.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was that experience like? I guess you ended up seeing so many facets of Chai Lifeline, right? You saw the camp as a camper, as a counselor, then a big sister, now getting involved in the crisis team, which is almost like its own division.
100%. I think that it was fascinating, realizing there's so much more to Chai Lifeline than most people even know. Each person probably knows their little part, whether they're a Camp Simcha counselor, Camp Simcha, where if you're somebody who's a volunteer in the hospital, the hospitals. It was very unique in that I really did get to know a whole bunch of different parts of the organization and realize the scope of the organization. Until then, I would say most, I for sure did not know it, and most people around me did not know really what Chai Lifeline does and how far-reaching they are with children who have some sort of illness, whether it's cancer or a chronic illness.
And being a survivor, I'm sure peppered the entire lens of everything that you're looking through when you're seeing all of these situations, whether it's being a big sister or whether you're in the crisis team. Like, it must have, obviously it affects you in everything. Would you say, how would you say that it impacted your work in, let's say, on the crisis team?
I think it gave it certain amounts of understanding, certain amounts of sensitivity, certain amounts of recognizing that even if I'm not sharing my own personal story, I kind of got it to some degree, Baruch Hashem, not to the degree that somebody who's in actual crisis is dealing with, but I was able to a little bit understand the language, a little bit understand some of the feelings, but again, kind of still kept me a little bit separate because thankfully that wasn't an area that I was in.
How much should going to the camp
personally
affect your decision to join Chai Lifeline and I guess ultimately end you up as director of family services? Or Camp Simcha, sorry.
Completely. Camp Simcha, it was my involvement in Camp Simcha that made me say, this is this is what I want. I always knew I wanted to work with children. That was before I even started graduate school. Interestingly, for some reason, which I have no idea to this day, because I had never worked with the cancer population before at all. But in my graduate school essay, I had written that I would like to do something with the cancer population, which is strange because I honestly, like I said, I've never done anything with it. But it was really once I was in camp that I said, this is what I want. This is, my dream is to be working and giving back and doing something in this area.
So getting back to, you're an intern now at Crisis Team, and what was that experience like? And then, I guess moving along, how did you come to where we are?
Right. So Crisis was, it was a whole different world. It's a world of just, you're constantly on alert. You're constantly involved in situations that you just can't conceive even, very often. I was involved in, Libby Kletzky at the time and some of these worldwide tragedies, and then some of the tragedies that were really just more personal of, family members. It's devastating, to be honest. Crisis was a devastating part of my life. It was very hard. You felt you were able to a little bit alleviate a little bit of the pain, and a little bit keep people, focused on what they need to do at that time. But it was very hard. I think Crisis was a very hard time. And Sarah, you have something? Okay. And, I had done it for about a year and change. And at that point, when Tony Cabot, who used to be in my position, was leaving, Rabbi Scholar offered me to take over this position, and which basically was running the clinical department, for the illness department. And that was much more, I think, what I ultimately wanted to do, and the world I wanted to be.
So he just offered it to you, huh? That's so interesting, because he, we had him on the podcast in season 1.
Yes.
2 episodes we did, and we probably could have done another 2 episodes with him. And it's so interesting because one of the things that he talks about that is the hallmark of Chai Lifeline is the just get it done attitude that exists. It's interesting because it started from him, and I'm so impressed that he must have seen you and been like, she's probably perfect, and just offered the role to you, and it must have been. So that's amazing. What a story.
I'm curious how you protected yourself, in that you must have had to work out how to turn your experience from something that could be triggering to something that could be empowering and push you forward. How do you make that distinction?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I struggled a lot with in the beginning was this feeling of survivor guilt. There was definitely an issue of survivor guilt. There was definitely an issue of, like you said, kind of, making my story not be what's leading everything in what I'm doing. The survivor guilt piece was a big deal for me until I actually spoke to a dean of mine in graduate school. And he said to me, he goes, did you ask why when you were diagnosed? And I said, no, because why not me versus somebody else? I said, I really kind of said, this is what, Hashem wants for me. This is what Hashem wants for me. He happens to be a Jewish guy, and I had said to him, if that's what Hashem wanted, that's what Hashem wanted. I didn't ask why me. So he goes, so why are you now asking why you? Why are you asking now? Why do you survive and not somebody else? Because clearly, for whatever reason, you were supposed to survive. Another person who didn't, for whatever reason, that wasn't, what their life story was. And so he kind of flipped really the whole concept in my head and gave me a different perspective on it. And that definitely helped with that realm. And then as far as really just reminding myself that this wasn't my story, that I was able to take my story, to use it to get, again, to understand and have perspective on what people were feeling, but recognizing that really at the end of the day, every single person does go through their own story, and every single person has their own challenges and strengths and weaknesses and all of that. And so I'm able to use what I've gone through as something to help me in that, but not define exactly what I'm doing, because at the end of the day, it's really somebody else's fault.
But guilt. You talked about the guilt. The guilt is a funny thing, and it affects everyone. Like a parent has guilt because they feel they want to, I wish I could take this away from my child, right? I would take it instead of them in a heartbeat. And guilt is such a non-productive feeling, right? It doesn't get us anywhere. It just, it's a downward spiral.
But I love how you handled it. She handled it in two ways. She went to an expert.
Yep.
She talked to somebody else and gave her a different perspective. And then to take it and look at, so many things. Like I myself struggled with anxiety as a kid, and to be able to use that and have that propel your and be a strength is a matter of change of perspective. And I think that that's so important.
Yeah. And it doesn't just go without saying. And that could be one of those things that Rabbi Scholar saw. And that's why he chose you, because that's not something that's easy to learn.
Right. And it's interesting because I do use my story at times. I really, for the most part, it's something that, I'm not what we call poster child cancer kid. I'm not the one who would, introduce myself within 5 minutes of knowing me. You'll know that I had been sick. But when I feel like it's important, I do use it, when I'm in a classroom and there's a bunch of teenage girls completely dramatically, crying and they can't really find a way to calm down when their friend was just diagnosed with Hodgkin's. And that's really where I usually keep it. It has to really be the same diagnosis, just because I do feel Hodgkin's is different than a lot of other diagnoses. But I was in a classroom where the girls were just totally distraught, and no matter what I was saying, it was not calming them down. And at that point, I did say, I want to share something with you. But at that point, I did tell them a little of my story and told them that, Baruch Hashem, I am married. Baruch Hashem, have 3 children, and your friend's going to be, Emer Hashem, she's going to be okay too. And that was, their mouths dropped, and all of a sudden the crying stopped, and they were able to. And I feel like it is a tool that I can use when it's appropriate, but recognizing the times that it's appropriate and the times that's really not,
I find it interesting though, because you mentioned the survivor's guilt. I always associate survivor's guilt with like massive accidents, like horrible things happening to multiple people at once. And you happen to be the 1 or 2 people that actually survive that. And you're like wondering to yourself, why am I the one out of all these people? Where when you're sick like this and you're dealing with cancer, you're dealing with treatments, it's not you and everybody else, it's you and your treatment. So how does that survivor's guilt really kick in, or how does this come about, I guess, and when you're dealing with these kinds of illnesses?
I don't think guilt is rational. That's the truth. I don't think it's a rational feeling. I think that guilt, similar, like Sarah, you said, it's a feeling of there's something happening that I feel bad about. There's something happening that I wish wasn't happening, that, I feel bad that there's somebody else suffering. I feel bad that there's somebody else who's not doing well. I was chosen to do well by, again, this feeling of like, it's out of my control. I really didn't do anything to make this happen more for me than somebody else. We both underwent treatment. We're both doing what we're supposed to be doing. I survived. She didn't. Why? So I don't think it's a rational thing. I think it's more of just a feeling of like, I don't want this bad thing to be happening to somebody else. It's a, you're completely empathetic. I think it's a where you really can put yourself into the other person's shoes in some way and say like, I just wish it wasn't ending the way that theirs is ending, different than mine did. I think,
So you've gone through this, horrible situation. And would you say that this propels you and pushes you in this role to do this more than otherwise? Like, is the guilt a factor in your daily workings with some of the families?
I don't think so. I don't think that it's necessarily the guilt that propels you. It's more the feeling of the rationale behind it, meaning the rationale behind, let's say, what this, dean of mine had told me. There's a reason that I did, Baruch Hashem survive. There is a reason. So let me do something good with that, or let me then propel that.
So how do you separate yourself? Because, for me, I always tell myself, well, okay, so I'll often get asked, actually, by donors especially, they'll say to me, like, you must deal with such sad situations all the time. You must be down and depressed. And I say, no, actually the opposite. Like, yes, we're dealing with sad situations, but we're bringing hope and happiness. And it's all where you put your focus. If you put your focus on the sad, then okay, you'll be sad. But if you put your focus on the happy, you'll be happier. And it's a question of a mindset. But I'm curious for you, because you must come across young women who are the same age as you were, who are in the same, very similar circumstances. And how do you cope with that? How is it not me? It's not my family. Like that's pretty close to home.
I think that there are times where it definitely hits closer to home than others. There are definitely those situations. But again, I think that at those times, the ones that really do hit very close to home, then I feel like, okay, then maybe my story in some way can be helping them. And those might be the ones where I do, again, share what I've been through if it's helpful to them. But overall, when it's really not as close to home, then I'm able to say, okay, you know what, that's not my story. That wasn't what happened with me. That wasn't my, situation. And do try to say, okay, but how can I help you? I think it's similar to what you were saying, where it's focusing on, I'm here to be able to say what I can do to make this a little bit better for you. I can't fix the situation, but I can at least take a little bit of the anxiety or the sadness or the, negativity away from you by trying to empower you and empower, you to realize that there is hope. There is, life after cancer. There is life, after all of this, and you hopefully will get there too.
I'm hearing something, behind what you're saying, the element of not feeling like you have control, like when clients find like you were saying, why did this happen? And could I be doing something differently? And why me? And a lot of issues about how everyone is now telling you what to do. You don't get any choice in the matter. And I see it as an issue for many, many clients. And there's also who they choose to be around, because, well, you never know if you're like going to start looking at percentages, and maybe I don't want to be part of that group, and I don't want to see other people suffering. And I wonder if it's something that you have seen as well, both with clients and case managers, about how they handle the lack of control over their medical situation.
Sure. I'd say especially with like new diagnoses, I think that the first thing you see, whether it's the parents or whether the kids, it's this feeling of like my whole life is just spiraled out of control. And I see it a lot with the parents, actually, where all of a sudden everybody is telling them what to do. They're getting advice from everyone. And they kind of feel like I'm no longer in charge here. I'm like the mother, and people are yet bringing food to my house, and people are telling me that, okay, I have to send my kids with volunteers right now. I'm not ready to send my kids with volunteers right now. Or I must send my kid, again, let's go to Camp Simcha. You have to send them to Camp Simcha. And my child's sick. I'm not ready to be sending them away for 2 weeks, to camp without their doctor, who I need in the room with them at all times, So I definitely do this feeling. And I think one of the things we constantly stress with them is the importance of being able to say to people around you what it is that you do want to still have some semblance of control over. The whole idea of control, how much do we really actually have? Yeah, we don't really have that much control in life. There are certain things we can control, and if I tell parents, if you want nobody to bring over food, then you're allowed to say, that's not helpful to me. What's really helpful to me is if you would take my kids out on Sunday afternoon. That would be helpful to me. But, the one thing I would really like to do for my kids is still make them dinner, every night, or whatever it is. Take back the control where you can in the small areas, recognize where you can't, and the things that you still can have some control over, definitely do. And with kids, it's the same thing, their life feels so out of control. Even when you're packing for the hospital, the suggestion I always say is let them be involved. Let them pick what the pajamas they're taking with them. Let them pick, is there something they want to put bring with them a special pillow, a special blanket, pictures of the family, whatever it is, but give them a little sense of control. So they want an IV in their right hand, their left hand, all those things, just so they feel a little bit like they're making a decision. They're still involved here. Not everything is happening to them, but they get to make, some decision with it.
And now, Sarah, you kind of brought us to kind of the next direction of where I think we should take this podcast, which is your day-to-day workings as a leader within Chai Lifeline. And, that's a great question about control. And I am curious though. So that's kind of an outset or an outlook. And I'm sure that you imbue that into all of the case managers that work in the New York region and in Chai Lifeline in general. But I'm curious, as a leader and a director of a whole slew of very capable, caring, giving, incredible case managers that exist within the framework of Chai Lifeline, which I argue is probably the most important thing that Chai Lifeline offers the Jewish community is our case management.
You argued that as a scholar.
Yeah. And, as a leader, do you have a certain way of managing, of oversight, of outlook? What's your perspective on, I guess, ensuring that the case managers stay focused, are able to continue to do the work that they do? How do you motivate? I'm just curious, on how do you work with your team?
All right. So I think that I'm very lucky because I think my team has a lot of inner motivation. Everybody, I would say, really, who works for Chai Lifeline, and I'm assuming you guys see this in Canada too, but there's a passion. I don't think that anyone could really do this job, and especially be a case manager and deal with families day in and day out without like a passion for what they're doing and a feeling that what they're doing is making a difference and that they want to be making a difference. So I think my job's a little bit easier just because of that. They really do.
I would actually argue with you a little bit on that because
go for it.
I find passionate people are often, they care. Mm-hmm. So if you guys are not on the same page and things come up and it actually could be a lot, they could create a lot of politics and a lot of issues.
Well, come to the New York meetings. I mean, yes, we have a lot of passionate people, and there's a lot of opinions. So I think our definitely passion is our biggest strength, our biggest weakness in a sense. The biggest strength is really, like you said, everybody cares, but it also comes with everybody has real opinions, and we talk them out. That's the truth, and I'm willing to hear somebody else's opinion if you have a real rationalization behind that opinion. If you have a real reason why you feel that that's the way to go, I'm willing to listen to it, and we're willing to try it. For the most part, unless it's something that we can't financially do for somebody, or whether it's something that we, policy wise, as far as an organization, we can't do. Other than that, if you have a good rationalization of why you want to do something and why you think it's going to be helpful for that child, and you have a way to make it happen, I'm kind of open to it. So, I think that we do listen. But Sarah, did you do differently with your case managers?
No, I agree. And the collaboration is really important. I do like to hear why someone wants to go, in a certain direction. And sometimes we have, two opposing teams of, let's do it this way versus let's do it that way. And what I've discovered is that it's also nice to give the client choices, to tell them there are two ways we could proceed here. And neither of them is wrong. What works best for you. And I like to, like you said, give them some control, empower them to be part of our decision-making process. Like if it's something simple, like how much information to share with a child, right? Some people say all the information. Some people say only as much as necessary, right? So let's get the parents and the family involved in the process too. So, yeah.
Is there a certain like mantra though, or something that you kind of get, with the team to, let's say, keep them motivated, keep them, dealing with the monotony of day in and day out, dealing with such hard situations?
I don't think there's necessarily a mantra. That would be nice though. If you have one, I'm happy to hear it.
I'd like to hear yours. I don't have one.
We don't have a mantra, but we do try, especially we have a case managers meeting once a week. And we do really try to applaud the happenings, of something that someone did. If there's something that someone did that week that really was out of the box, or something that really just they made something happen that we didn't think was going to be able to be possible, or they really made something that they felt like was a small thing they did that really made a big difference. We do try to celebrate those things. We do try to talk about it. We do try to let others know. And I think even amongst just the case managers, and I think that does motivate them to realize, like, you are being appreciated and you are being recognized for the hard work you did, or for the thing that you were able to accomplish that nobody thought you could.
Can you give an example of some of those things that happened?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there are, but nice to put me on the spot.
Sarah, go first.
Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
No, I'm the guest host. Sorry, you're the guest.
Right.
No, look, last week I love that we did what we did for one of our clients, where we arranged it was the last day of treatment, and we arranged a limo to go pick her up, to take her to the last day of treatment, and drove her back. I think that was incredible. That was awesome. So, something like that, like kind of out of the box, right? Like that was something that a case manager came up with, and literally from beginning to end just arranged it.
Those things are super, they're nice, they're exciting, they're big. I like the smaller wins, when somebody helps someone get over something that they're feeling stuck with, like a personal change, that suddenly there's a new realization and it puts them on a better trajectory. Those for me are super exciting. I know it's not as cool as a limo.
It's not as fast, but no, last week, I think last week, one of our volunteer coordinators called me at like 8:00 at night to tell me about this win that she was able to get a girl to go to camp, and she was so excited about it. And it was just because she was sharing with me, like in your story, Dr. Cheryl, the community that it took to get this person to sign up to go to Camp Simplot and agree to go, and she was so proud of it. And that was just like a small win, and I think that's something to be just as celebrated as the helicopter rides and limo rides.
Exactly.
But I think it's important, both aspects are part of Chai Lifeline. And that's, those are things. So donors, you might hear that, like, oh, Chai Lifeline got this, and we got a lot of traction actually on that, on Instagram and Facebook about that post.
Positive or negative?
People were like really pumped up about it. But, if we were to share the same win about this girl going to camp, I don't know that we would get the same, right? I don't know that we would get the same.
It's not a tangible.
Yeah.
Not as flashy.
But
Right.
but from the back end, it is huge. And when you have this impact on someone that sets them on a better, like, things are just going to be better now. Either they let someone in, or they accepted help, or they accepted their situation, and now they're working towards how can we make the best of this. Whatever, those type of things are also, they're equally as important, really. Just a little less.
So sorry, Dr. Cheryl, we interrupted. Do you have anything that you can share?
I can think of one story where there was a child who came in from, I believe it was Israel. I can't be sure about that, but he was coming in from someplace else. He was moving to New York, and he needed to be specifically near the hospital in the city, and he needed to go to school. He was a young child. He was like 3 or 4 years old. Needed to be in school near this hospital, and most schools were saying no. Most schools were saying that they didn't want to take this responsibility. The child, I believe, had seizures and didn't want to take the responsibility. And there was one school that was saying yes. However, it costs a lot of money. It's a school in Manhattan. They charge a lot of money because they need to charge a lot of money. And they weren't able to really give much of a discount. They had given a little bit of a discount. Our case manager had reached out to the school itself and had tried to get a little bit more of a discount, got a little bit more of a discount, but the family was still short, quite a couple $1,000s, I think it was, at the end of the day. And the case manager really reached out to a bunch of different places, a bunch of different organizations, including Chai Lifeline, who gave some money as well. And we were able to make it happen, and that child ended up in that school. And that, I think, was amazing, or the times where the case manager was able to have a family was waiting for a wheelchair accessible van for literally years from, I think, through the government agencies and all that, and it wasn't coming through. And they found also another organization here that actually fits your van and makes it wheelchair accessible. And the staff, like literally within days from when this whole process started until I think she called the family and said, yeah, they're going to do it. They're going to take care of your van. And a couple of weeks later, the van was being delivered, like, fixed and changed. And this family's life changed completely. They're able to go out now and able to do things, So I think those are huge wins. To Morty, I think similar to like you were saying, the wins of convincing a family that they really should go to a retreat and hearing the feedback at the end of it was amazing for us and life-changing for us. And my husband spoke in a group but has never talked up about his feelings before, or a mother saying, I've never talked in a group before. And I felt so validated and heard by all the other people in the group. So, I think it's
How can we get
constantly
invited to more of those
I knew you were going to go there.
Well, you know what? Come on.
Not on the podcast. Not on the podcast.
I'll call you later.
Yeah.
I was like, is she going to
I'll
do it?
put you on
Yes, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I think as a senior team leader in Chai Lifeline, you must have other counterparts that you work with in various different areas. People in camp, people who run Camp Simcha, people overseas. I'm curious. Within your team, do you have any relationships that are supportive, that you're working together in a specific way that's just something that the world should hear about within Chai Lifeline that's interesting?
I think the Chai Lifeline world is a team. We at our staff meetings, even at our case managers meeting, we have Rifki Schwartz, Zuckerman, Rifki, and Rivka Reichman come, from camp. And we really do work for each child that there is a team that's working with that child. So from the goals that we may talk about that they have during camp to what we're working with during the year, to the volunteer coordinators that we work with who really do, we're all part of this one team trying to figure out what's best for this child.
And when you say, do you guys innovate new programs? Would you say that are there new ideas? And I'm curious, like, how do those, do they come together as a group? Do you guys do that together? Like, sometimes I'm always astounded by what things that New York comes out with for the rest of Chai Lifeline. And I'm just curious, how do you get there? Where do those ideas come from?
I think most, new programs and things like that start out from us talking about a need, that there's some sort of need. Let's say when we started that Moving On program, let's say, for example, which we had for a couple of years, which were really like 16-year-olds, 15, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds who were starting to get ready to graduate from Camp Simcha, graduate from Chai Lifeline. And we were talking about the need for them to help with that, for us to help with that transition. And so through the need, we came up with the idea of having the Moving On program, which, at that time we had Sarah Schreier, who's now become one of our case managers, actually led that program with Rivka Reichman. And they used to go to people's houses and really talk about the transition and really try to plan and come up with some sort of goals and a plan for that child over the next couple of years to help them transition from when they have the support of, the full support of Chai Lifeline to when, they really do graduate from us and move on to the next phase of their life. And so that, things like that, I think, that's an example just of one of the times that, the need kind of propels the program.
So it comes about through the need.
Yeah.
And really understanding. So, but I think it's important to point out that you need an intimate knowledge of your clients' issues and your clients, what's going on in their lives to be able to pinpoint that need. And I think that speaks to any business, really. You really need that intimate understanding of what's going on with a particular product or a particular idea. And I think obviously they're very different, but to speak of Chai Lifeline's case managers and the amount of clients that each case manager has and the amount of relationships that they've built, and for them to know what's going on in a particular situation, I mean, it's pretty impressive. And for them to be able to say, hey, you know what, I think this would make a great program. And I know a lot of High Lifeline's programs over the years have just come about through necessity. Like we need to start a homework club. Okay, well now iShine, like iShine begins, and it's like this entire new division of High Lifeline will spring up out of nowhere almost,
Right.
because hey, there was an intimate need from a case manager who noticed that something was going on and said like we need this.
Right.
This needs to happen. So that's incredible.
Right. We do have our case managers often ask, families like kind of what their wish lists were. We don't like to assume we know what they would want. Really, it is more ask the cases, ask your clients what are things that they've been asking you for that we haven't been able to fulfill up until now that they would really love. We have a whole list of things. We had the money. We have a whole list of more things that we'd be able to do.
So this is where we flash the donate here button, right?
Oh, no, but it's all about empowering. You're saying to a client, what do you think? It's the same as with staff. Every time they come and say, well, what should I do? What should I do? Okay, what do you think? Tell me what you're thinking about doing. I'm like, yes, I could give you what I think is the answer, but it's about giving it right back to them and saying, you're the expert on you. So
that's such an important leadership tactic. That's so it's so important for clients, but also you mentioned employees, right? Like for staff, it's we hire people who are intelligent, who are capable, and sometimes I think they forget that.
Yeah.
Or it's a big decision, or confidence, or it's new. There's so many reasons why people come and ask, what would you do? But most of the people here, like you said, Cheryl, they have opinions. They really do.
It's not just New York. Okay, I feel better.
No.
I mean, I will say we don't have such political staff meetings that in Canada, but so what?
No, but there definitely are disagreements, and
Sure.
When it comes to the family stuff, I've seen as a volunteer coordinator definitely making decisions based on what the family's needs are and whatever's happening at the time. Yeah, there's going to be disagreements because there's always disagreements with one person's opinion versus another opinion. And it's just somewhere in the middle, they always meet, and there's always that compromise that does happen. So it's just trying to gear them into that direction.
So we're coming toward the end of the podcast, and there's a couple of things that I want to kind of get to. As a strong Jewish woman who has a lot of responsibilities at work, at home, I'm always in amazement, actually, particularly with all the women here in High Lifeline in Canada, and how they manage to juggle all of the responsibilities that go on in their home life and at work, and it's an incredible thing. I'm curious, how do you de-stress? What does Dr. Cheryl do to take a step back and take care of herself? Because we're always telling people how important it is for them to take care of themselves when they're dealing with a sick child. But sometimes I wonder how our staff does that. And I'm curious what you can share that I could employ perhaps even here in Canada.
So I would definitely say it's the quality of time with my family. I don't have I would say, even with my children, I don't have huge amounts of time. My hours are long. And so, during the week, I really wouldn't say that I have a lot of time with them. But it's quality time. And I think that, as much as we can on weekends and over weekends, I really do think that that's kind of what grounds me is knowing it's really watching that balance of having, family and having, my children around me and things like that, and spending time with them, which allows me then to do what I do during the week, and even those times where we're interrupted in what we're doing, but it's on a Sunday, let's say we're interrupted, we're doing something as a family, and then I get a phone call and I have to take it, but I still ground myself because I have my kids there, and I think that that's a big piece for me and a big de-stressor for me, I would say, is that, when you're not on, you're always on. Okay, I like when we're always on. Our phone really is 24/6. But at the same time, when I'm not actively involved in it, I really try to be very focused.
So how do you separate yourself
home life
from the casework you're managing from your family life?
Are you able to walk in your front door and say, okay, I'm home now, I have to concentrate on what's happening here? Or is what's happening at work still partly there, like halfway there? I know you just said like on Sundays, if you're like out with your family, like you'll take a call, but like when you walk in at home, like I know everything is still, it has to still be there somehow.
So I try. I would say that I do try that you walk in and you can kind of put your phone down for a little bit and really focus. I don't think it goes away. I think that there are moments where it definitely creeps in. You know, when you take your kid to a doctor's appointment and they're crying from getting a shot and you're thinking of, wait a minute, all these parents who like do this every day with their kids. And it hits you. And I think there are moments where it really does hit you. And then there are moments where you say like, okay, I need to separate myself and actively separate myself and say like, that's their story, not mine. You know, similar to like what I was saying before. I think it's hard. It's a struggle. I don't think that there's an easy answer to it. I think it's a struggle. I try very hard. If it's not an emergency and it's not, you know, at after hours, I try very hard to, you know, tell somebody that if it's not time sensitive, let's talk Monday, or let's, you know, let's talk a little later. If it's something that's time sensitive or that they really need, that then we're here. And my kids realize that too. You know, they understand it in their own ways of, you know, mommy has to help somebody else who needs help right now, and then I'm coming back to you. And so we try. It's a balance. I don't know, I think every mother in the world tries, who's working or who has other responsibilities. It's a struggle and it's a balance that they constantly are dealing with.
Can I ask you the same question, Sarah?
No.
Fair enough. I mean, you have a little one at home too, so I mean, it's
Right. I think, like you said, sometimes are easier than other times. You never know what's gonna say, oh, look, I'm at this doctor's appointment. And sometimes you get a little extra scared because you've seen the other options, right? The other possibilities. And it's a constant struggle.
You know, I will say that, you know, my children really grew up with me working at High Life. I grew up at High Lifeline, to be frank, but my children grew up watching me at High Lifeline. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was to take the time. I think it was Rabbi Scholar who gave it to me, actually. It was Friday night. When you sit down and you unwind the week and you talk about, you know, what it is that we accomplished at High Lifeline, all the amazing things, whether it was the limo or the fundraising or anything that happened, when you sit down and you tell your kids, look what we did. We accomplished these things. It wasn't me. We as a family all came together and this is what we were able to do. And you make them part of the conversation. You make the kids part of that discussion. It's extremely, extremely beneficial. They know I'm gone a lot. They know I'm busy, I'm working, I'm here, I'm there. I'm you know, there are days sometimes I'm home for very short periods of time and I don't see them for a couple days or 2 or 3 days at a time. But if they know what I'm doing and they know what I'm accomplishing, they feel good about it and they feel like they're a part of it. And if I make sure to make them a part of it, it's very important. So, yeah.
I think my kids also love the perks of High Lifeline. So we try very much to say, like, we're going to mommy's camp, you know, when we go to a retreat, they're going to mommy's camp, so that they do recognize, like, yes, it is hard when, you know, I have to take that phone call or I have to do that, whatever, but there are some little perks you get, you know, we go on a Chol trip and you get the gum, that's a perk, and they enjoy them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your ideas, really appreciate it. And truly, seeing what you guys accomplished in New York, we're in awe of it here in Canada, and it's incredible that all the things that you do. You're a blessing to Klal Yisrael. Thank you very much for your time today. And I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add.
I appreciate you because I'm learning from you.
Great.
I want to be like you when I go.
Oh, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you very much
to all our listeners today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Book, for your time and sharing your story and insight with us. It's always amazing how some stories come full circle. Started off as a client and ended up as the Director of Family Services. Being in that position, or as a case manager, is not one to be taken lightly. They almost become part of the family, if not. and it is very difficult at times to be able to remove yourself and separate themselves from what's going on with the clients and their own families at times. Knowing when to take a step back and a break is very important for their own mental health and well-being. Thank you again, Dr. Book, and thank you to the listeners for choosing to be with us today. Until next time. On Air with Chai is a Chai Lifeline Canada project, produced by myself, Bryan Strasberg, hosted by myself and the Executive Director of Chai Lifeline Canada, Mordechai Rothman. Guests are booked by Orly Davis, and graphic design is done by Candace Alper. On Air with Chai is edited by myself, and the music is provided by Music Unlimited at pixabay.com. To learn more about Chai Lifeline and how you can help us, please visit our website at chailifelinecanada.org. Don't forget to subscribe and give us that 5-star rating, and of course, share it with all your friends.